Vasili Stalin was born on March 21, 1921, to Joseph Stalin and Nadezhda Alliluyeva. Vasily struggled emotionally after his mother's death, beginning to drink heavily by age 13 and frequent violent outbursts, particularly towards his sister. Following his mother's death, Stalin distanced himself from his children, leaving their care to staff and security guards. Vasily became close to Koroly Pakhr, one of Stalin's bodyguards, but Pakhr was executed during the Great Purge in 1937. In 1933, Vasily and his sister Svetlana were enrolled in Moscow Model School No. 25. Vasily struggled academically, and teachers often reported his poor behavior to Stalin. In 1937, he was transferred to Special School No. 2, but continued to act out. At 17, he entered Kacha Military Aviation School. Stalin insisted Vasily receive no special treatment. He graduated in 1940 as an Air Force lieutenant and married Galina Berdonskaya later that year. During World War II, Vasily was sent to the front in 1941 under the name Ivanov to hide his identity. He participated in 29 combat missions and reportedly shot down 2 enemy planes, though his role was often symbolic due to his father's status. His colleagues disliked him, suspecting him of being an informant. After a reckless incident in 1943 where he dropped explosives into the Moskova River, killing a flight engineer, Vasily was demoted. However, he quickly rose again, becoming the youngest major general in the Red Army at age 24 and earning multiple military honors. After the war, Vasily turned to sports, founding the VVS Moscow hockey team. Despite conflicts with coach Anatoly Tarasov and the tragic loss of the team in a 1950 plane crash, VVS won 3 Soviet Championship League titles from 1951 to 1953. Vasily relinquished his role with the team after Stalin's death on March 5, 1953. Vasily arrived shortly after Stalin's death and, in a drunken rage, accused others of poisoning his father. His life spiraled into turmoil as he was denied a military post in Moscow and forced to retire. On April 28, 1953, he was arrested for associating with foreign diplomats and charged with anti-Soviet propaganda and negligence. Sentenced to 8 years in prison after a private trial without legal representation, he served time under the alias Vasily Pavlovich Vasilyev. Released in 1960, he was granted a pension, an apartment in Moscow, and permission to wear his military medals, but struggled to rebuild his life. Svetlana Alliluyeva, also known as Lana Peters, was Stalin's youngest daughter, born on February 28, 1926. She was close to her nanny Alexandra and faced the tragic loss of her mother, who died by suicide in 1932, a truth she only learned a decade later. Svetlana attended a regular Moscow school and lived through the Great Purge, which claimed several of her relatives. In 1942, Winston Churchill met her and described her as a charming daughter. As a teenager, she fell in love with filmmaker Alexei Kapler, but Stalin disapproved, leading to Kapler's exile. Svetlana had several marriages. Her first, in 1944, was to Grigory Morozov, with whom she had a son, Iosif. They divorced in 1947 but remained friends. In 1949, she married Yuri Zhdanov and had a daughter, Yekaterina, in 1950, but the marriage ended quickly. Her third marriage, to Ivan Svanidze in 1962, lasted less than a year due to his poor health. Finally, from 1970 to 1973, she was married to American architect William Wesley Peters, with whom she had a daughter, Olga. After Stalin's death in 1953, Svetlana Alliluyeva worked as a lecturer and translator in Moscow. Although she was forced to study history and political thought, her true passion was literature. She later reflected on how her father's decisions, including his harsh treatment of her love for filmmaker Alexei Kapler, deeply impacted her life. In 1963, Svetlana fell in love with Kanwar Brajesh Singh, an Indian communist. Despite their deep bond, they were not allowed to marry, and after his death in 1966, she traveled to India to scatter his ashes. While there, she sought asylum at the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi, defecting to the United States in 1967. In the U.S., she publicly denounced Stalin's regime and began writing. Her first book, 20 Letters to a Friend, gained international fame, though poor investments later left her in financial difficulty. In 1984, she briefly returned to the USSR with her daughter Olga, but found life there unsatisfactory. She returned to the U.S. 2 years later, denying anti-Western statements made during her time in the Soviet Union. Svetlana spent her final years in Wisconsin and passed away in 2011 at the age of 85. Leaving behind a legacy as a voice of defiance against authoritarianism and a witness to history. Yakov Dzhugashvili, born on March 31, 1907, was Joseph Stalin's eldest son and the only child from his first marriage to Kato Svanidze. His mother passed away from typhus when Yakov was just 8 months old, and Stalin left him to be raised by Svanidze's relatives. Yakov lived with his aunts for 14 years before being brought to Moscow in 1921 to live with his father, where he struggled to adapt. He did not speak Russian and faced hostility from Stalin, who refused to let him use the surname Stalin. Despite these challenges, Yakov built close relationships with his half-siblings and his stepmother Nadezhda Alliluyeva. Interested in education, Yakov pursued studies in his 20s, eventually graduating from the Institute of Transport in 1935. He worked as a chimney sweep engineer at a factory named after his father before entering the Artillery Academy in 1937, from which he graduated in 1941, shortly before World War II. Yakov Dzhugashvili's first love, Zoya Gunina, faced Stalin's disapproval, leading Yakov to attempt suicide in 1928. They later married but separated after their infant daughter's death. Yakov was briefly engaged to Olga Golisheva, with whom he had a son, Yevgeny, though Stalin never recognized the child. Yakov's final marriage was to Yulia Meltzer, a Jewish dancer. Despite their union and the birth of their daughter Galina, Stalin's animosity toward Yakov overshadowed their relationship. In 1941, Yakov Dzhugashvili, Stalin's oldest son, was sent to fight during the German invasion of the Soviet Union. He was captured near Smolensk, but the details of how it happened are unclear. Some say he refused to retreat, while others believe he surrendered willingly. Stalin was furious about his capture, feeling Yakov should have died instead. He even suspected betrayal and had Yakov's wife arrested, leaving his daughter to be cared for by Svetlana. And the Germans tried to use Yakov in their propaganda, putting him in photos and leaflets. During interrogations, Yakov criticized the Soviet army and made anti-Semitic remarks despite his wife being Jewish. He was moved between camps and eventually sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. The Germans offered to trade Yakov for important prisoners like Field Marshal Paulus or even Hitler's nephew, but Stalin refused, saying all Soviet soldiers were equal to him. While in the camp, Yakov struggled with stress and often clashed with other prisoners. His capture became a symbol in both German and Soviet propaganda. On 14 April 1943, Yakov Dzhugashvili died in Sachsenhausen concentration camp. The details of his death remain unclear. Some reports say he ran into an electric fence surrounding the camp, while others claim he was shot by the Germans. Alexander Yakovlevich Davydov was a Soviet army officer and the secret son of Joseph Stalin. While Stalin was living in exile in a small Siberian village called Kureka, he had a relationship with a 14-year-old girl, Lydia Pereprigna. They had 2 children, one who died shortly after birth in 1914, and Alexander, who was born on November 6, 1917. Stalin left the village before Alexander was born, and Lydia later married a fisherman named Yakov Davydov, who raised Alexander as his own son. Although Stalin knew about Alexander, they never met. Alexander joined the Soviet Army in 1940 and fought during World War II, including the campaign against Japan in 1945. He became a major in the army. Alexander had 2 sons, Edward and Yuri. In the 1970s, Alexander told Yuri about their family connection to Stalin, but warned him to keep it a secret due to Stalin's controversial legacy. Alexander died in 1987. In 2016, a DNA test confirmed with 99.98% accuracy that Alexander was Stalin's son. This was proven using genetic material from one of Stalin's grandsons, Alexander Berdyansky, the son of Vasili Stalin. Konstantin Stepanovich Kuzakov was a Soviet journalist and politician who helped organize Soviet television, radio, and cinema. He claimed to be the illegitimate son of Joseph Stalin, saying his mother, Maria Kuzakova, was Stalin's landlady and mistress during his exile in 1911. Stalin left before Konstantin was born. Some historians, like Simon Sebag Montefiore, believed this story, but there is no solid proof. Kuzakov studied at Leningrad University, possibly with Stalin's secret help. In 1932, he said the NKVD forced him to promise not to reveal his connection to Stalin. He worked as a philosophy teacher and later got a job in the Central Committee in Moscow. During World War II, he served as a colonel. In 1948, while working for a close Stalin ally, he was accused of being a spy for the U.S. Stalin didn't let him be arrested, but had him removed from the Communist Party. Kuzakov recalled one moment when Stalin looked at him as if he wanted to say something but didn't. After Stalin died, Kuzakov was allowed back into the Communist Party and worked in various cultural positions including the Ministry of Culture. He died in 1996. Artyom Sergeyev was Joseph Stalin's adopted son and a major general in the Soviet military. His biological father, Fyodor Sergeyev, a close friend of Stalin, died in a train accident in 1921. Lenin arranged for Stalin to adopt him. Sergeyev began his military career in 1938 at 17 and fought against German forces during World War II. By 23, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel and continued his service after the war. In 1960, he was in charge of air defenses protecting weapons factories in Dnepropetrovsk. He wrote 2 books about war and Stalin. His first wife, Amaya Ruiz Ibarruri, was the daughter of Spanish communist leader Dolores Ibarruri. Sergeyev passed away in 2008 and is buried at Kuntsevo Cemetery in Moscow.